You are listening to the Paranormal Papa Podcast, coming to you from Ferocious Feline Studios in Cassopolis, Michigan. This is episode 10. I'm your host, Paranormal Papa. You know, I love to mix things up on occasion, and I couldn't think of anyone more fitting to mix things up with than the great Darren Marlar. He tells some of the most incredible, spooky stories, fitting for spooky season 2025. But this time, he's going to tell you about a famous haunt that has been investigated hundreds of times by hundreds of teams over the years. Now, this place is very strange, as investigators have gone in and they have got evidence, they have got reaction, they have got communication, they have got physical contact. But others have gone in and got close to nothing. What is the true story of this amazing place? For that, my friends, we're going to turn this over to the great Darren Marlar.
On a frigid February morning in 1896, a farmhand stumbled upon a woman's body in a Kentucky orchard, her dress torn, her body awkwardly positioned, and her head completely missing. The brutal murder of Pearl Bryan, a pregnant Sunday school teacher from Indiana, would become one of the most sensational crimes of the 19th century, spawning folk songs, legends, and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. But Pearl's story was just the beginning of something far darker that would plague a particular spot in northern Kentucky for the next 128 years. Less than 2 miles from where Pearl's headless corpse was discovered stood a blood-soaked slaughterhouse with a deep well that drained animal blood into the earth for decades. That same building would later transform into a speakeasy, a mob-controlled casino where those who couldn't pay their debts sometimes never left, and finally into Bobby Mackey's music world, a honky-tonk, where country music played on the weekends, but where employees refused to enter the basement alone. Visitors reported being scratched by invisible hands, pushed downstairs, and encountering the overwhelming scent of rose perfume from a dancer who allegedly poisoned herself in the 1950s. Even the skeptical owner posted a warning sign saying, "This establishment is purported to be haunted. Management is not responsible and cannot be held liable for any action of any ghosts or spirits on these premises." In December 2024, the wrecking ball finally came for Bobby Mackey's, reducing the century-old structure to rubble. But those who knew the building's violent history wonder, can you really demolish a haunting? When the blood of countless victims has soaked into the very ground for over 170 years, when multiple people have died horrible deaths in the same location, when a sealed well that some called a portal to hell lies beneath tons of debris, does tearing down the walls really set the spirits free? Or does it simply remove the only barrier that was once keeping them contained? The building that stood at 44 Licking Pike in Wilder, Kentucky, witnessed more death and violence than most structures see in several lifetimes. From its origins as a slaughterhouse, where animal blood drained into a deep well, through decades of mob violence and mysterious deaths, to its final incarnation as Bobby Mackey's music world, a honky-tonk where patrons reported being scratched, pushed, and attacked by unseen forces, this location seemed to attract darkness, like a magnet draws iron fillings. The building's 45-and-a-half-year run as Bobby Mackey's came to an end on December 6, 2024, when demolition crews reduced the over 100-year-old structure to rubble. But that doesn't necessarily mean the hauntings themselves have ended. On the morning of February 1st, 1896, a 17-year-old farmhand named John Hewling made a discovery that would haunt northern Kentucky for generations. In an orchard less than 2 miles from what would become Bobby Mackey's, he found a woman lying in the bushes. Her dress was torn, her body positioned awkwardly against a fence, and her head was completely missing. The corpse belonged to Pearl Bryan, a 22-year-old Sunday school teacher from Greencastle, Indiana. She'd been 5 months pregnant when she left home on January 28th, telling her parents she was visiting friends in Indianapolis. Instead, she traveled to Cincinnati to meet Scott Jackson, a dental student at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery with whom she'd been having a secret romance. Pearl was the youngest of 12 children born to Alexander S. Bryan and Susan Jane Bryan, a well-respected farming family in Greencastle. She graduated from Greencastle High School in 1892 with the highest honors, becoming a special favorite of her graduating class. Beautiful, accomplished, and well-educated, Pearl had many admirers among the young men of Greencastle society, but none had captured her heart until she met Scott Jackson in the spring of 1895. Jackson came from a prominent family. His father was Commodore Jackson, who commanded many vessels and stood high in New Jersey social circles. But Scott's past held dark secrets. He narrowly escaped prison for embezzling $32,000 from the Pennsylvania Railroad Company by turning state's evidence against his partner, Alexander Letts. Despite this checkered history, which never reached Greencastle, Jackson was welcomed into the Bryan home as a gentleman of good standing. Their courtship seemed innocent enough to Pearl's parents. Jackson would borrow Will Wood's horse and buggy to take Pearl on drives through the countryside. But away from watchful eyes, their relationship had turned intimate. By September 1895, Pearl discovered she was pregnant. When Jackson left Greencastle for dental school in Cincinnati that October, Pearl's condition became increasingly difficult to hide. Desperate, she confided in her cousin Will Wood, who later testified about the tragic sequence of events that followed. Jackson initially tried to handle the situation from a distance. He sent Pearl various substances meant to induce miscarriage, prescriptions, and remedies that Wood would deliver to her. When these failed, Jackson suggested more dangerous solutions. Wood testified that Jackson claimed such operations were done every day, and that if he had the proper instruments, he could perform one himself. On January 25, 1896, Pearl received a letter from Jackson saying that he had secured a room in Cincinnati where the procedure could be performed. Wood gave Pearl the letter, and she expressed relief at finally having a solution to her predicament. She told her parents she was visiting the Bishop family at 95 Center Street in Indianapolis, packed her belongings, including her graduation dress, and left on the 135 eastbound train on January 27th. Jackson and his roommate Alonzo Walling met Pearl in Cincinnati. Walling was also from Indiana, though from humbler circumstances than Jackson. His father had died when he was 3, and his mother had sacrificed greatly to send him to dental school. The two had met at the Indiana Dental College before both transferred to Cincinnati. What happened next remains partially shrouded in mystery, but witness testimony and evidence presented at the trial paint a horrific picture. On Friday evening, January 31st, Jackson brought Pearl to Wallingford's Saloon at the corner of George and Plum Streets, an establishment in Cincinnati's notorious red light district where brothels and gaming houses operated openly. The saloon's owner, David Wallingford, later testified that Jackson arrived with Pearl and Walling around 7 p.m. They went to a back sitting room where Jackson ordered whiskey for himself and sarsaparilla for Pearl. The colored porter, Wallingford's words, not mine, Alan Johnson, remembered the evening vividly because he had an engagement with his own girlfriend that night. He saw all three leave in a carriage, with Walling on the box beside the driver. George H. Jackson, a black coachman, no relation to Scott, provided the most chilling testimony. He stated that Walling had approached him the night before at George and Elm Streets, offering $5 to drive a cab across the Newport Bridge. On Friday night, he met them as arranged. Walling gave him specific directions, climbing up on the box beside him as they crossed into Kentucky. During the ride, the coachman heard disturbing sounds from inside the carriage. A woman was moaning in pain and distress. The carriage shook violently, and he heard glass breaking. Frightened, he started to jump down, but Walling pulled a gun and threatened to blow him to hell if he didn't keep driving. They stopped near Fort Thomas, where Jackson emerged and helped the woman out, with Walling supporting her other side. The coachman was ordered to drive down the hill, turn around, and wait for a whistle. As he turned the carriage, he saw 3 figures climbing over a fence into an orchard. Terrified of being framed for whatever was happening, legitimate fear for a black man in 1896 Kentucky, he fled, leaving the horse tied to a post. The location where Pearl died told its own gruesome story. Detective Cal Krim of Cincinnati, one of the first investigators on scene, described finding blood everywhere, on the ground, splattered on bushes, soaked into the earth to a depth of 8 or 9 inches. The pattern suggested Pearl had initially walked beside her attacker before suddenly breaking into a run through a muddy area that she would have avoided given time to pick her path. Her attacker caught her quickly. The torn piece of her dress hanging from nearby brush showed where he had grabbed her. Defensive wounds on her left hand revealed she had fought desperately, grabbing the blade and cutting her fingers to the bone 3 times as she tried to stop it. The coroner, Dr. Tingley, made several crucial observations. The head had been severed rather high, with the knife striking the vertebra before changing course slightly downward. The work showed medical knowledge. The cut had been made from behind, between the 5th and 6th vertebra, in the manner of someone familiar with anatomy. Most horrifying was his conclusion about the timing. Pearl Bryan had been alive when the decapitation began. The massive blood loss and spray patterns could only have occurred while her heart was still beating. She had died not from poison or strangulation, but from having her head slowly cut off with dental instruments. The body discovered by young Hewling that Saturday morning was headless and initially unidentifiable. Pearl wore a light blue and white checkered cotton dress, a dark blue skirt, and a union suit of underwear. Her black cloth-topped shoes, however, would prove her undoing, or rather her killer's. In an impressive display of detective work, investigators noted the shoes bore the marking Lewis and Hayes, Greencastle, Indiana, 22-11, 62,458. Cincinnati detectives Krim and McDermott, along with Sheriff Jules Plummer of Campbell County, traveled to Greencastle to trace the purchase. L.D. Pook, a Newport shoe merchant, had already done his own investigation. He recognized the manufacturing style as that of Drew, Selby and Company of Portsmouth, Ohio. Further investigation revealed that Lewis and Hayes had ordered 12 pairs of black cloth top button shoes on April 18, 1895. Of these, only 1 pair was marked 22-11, a size 3 shoe with an unusually narrow width. The trail led directly to Pearl Bryan. Her sister Mary Stanley and mother came to Newport to identify the clothing. Between sobs, Mrs. Bryan recognized each item. The dress had been remade from one belonging to Pearl's deceased sister. Even the hairpins were identified, 2 gold-plated and 2 rubber ones of an auburn hue. Meanwhile, A.W. Early, manager of the Western Union office in Greencastle, had noticed something suspicious. Fred Bryan, Pearl's brother, had sent a telegram to Indianapolis asking if Pearl was visiting friends there. The answer came back negative. Pearl had never arrived. Early, who knew both Will Wood and Scott Jackson, put the pieces together and alerted the authorities. On February 5, 1896, police arrested Scott Jackson as he walked near his boarding house at 222 West 9th Street in Cincinnati. Under interrogation by Mayor John Caldwell and Police Chief Philip Deach, Jackson initially denied everything. He claimed he had not seen Pearl since January 2nd in Greencastle. But faced with mounting evidence, his story began to change. Alonzo Walling was arrested at 3:30 a.m. on February 6th after Jackson let slip that he wondered why Walling had not been arrested yet. Under questioning, Walling made a series of damaging admissions. He told investigators that on Christmas Day, Jackson had taken him into a corner of their room and confided that he'd gotten Pearl Bryan pregnant and must get rid of her. According to Walling, Jackson had proposed 2 plans: taking Pearl to a room, poisoning her with cocaine and leaving her there, or cutting her into pieces and depositing them in different vaults around the city. Jackson had studied a medical dictionary to learn about poisons and had specifically asked physicians about cocaine's effects. He'd purchased the drug from Coble's drugstore on 6th Street, dissolving it in water to paralyze her vocal organs before cutting off her head. The physical evidence mounted quickly. A blood-stained valise was found at John Kugel's saloon at 9th and Central. Kugel testified that Jackson had left it there Monday night, saying he'd returned for it the next day. When opened in Jackson's presence, he turned deathly pale and admitted it looked like blood inside. Chief Deach pressed him about whether this valise had carried Pearl's head. Jackson's response was telling. He said Walling had carried it and that the head was now in the river. More evidence emerged from their room and the dental college. In Jackson's locker, investigators found a pair of trousers with dried mud on the knees and bloodstains on the legs. Behind Jackson's trunk in their room, detectives found ladies' stockings and a pocketbook containing a piece of gold chain. A coat was recovered from a sewer in Richmond Street, where Walling said Jackson had told him to dispose of it. It too was bloodstained, with tansy leaves in the pocket. Tansy tea was commonly used to induce miscarriages. Legal scholars studying wrongful death cases have discovered something deeply unsettling about courtroom confessions. When defendants claim supernatural forces compelled them to kill, the pattern of their stories follows an identical structure across centuries and continents. In 1897, 2 dental students stood trial for decapitating a pregnant woman in Kentucky, and when one vowed from the gallows to haunt everyone involved in his prosecution, court reporters documented that within days, multiple officials connected to the case met tragic ends. The trial of Scott Jackson began April 21, 1896, in Newport. The courthouse was so packed that tickets were sold for admission, with over 5,000 people gathered outside for news. The completed jury included grocers, plumbers, carpenters, and merchants, ordinary men tasked with judging an extraordinary crime. The prosecution presented a devastating case. Will Wood testified about introducing Jackson to Pearl, about Jackson's confession that he had betrayed her, and about the various attempts to end her pregnancy. Wood produced a letter from Jackson dated February 5th, the day of his arrest, asking Wood to forge a letter from Pearl to her parents saying that she'd gone to Chicago. The letter read, quote, "Write a letter home signed by Bert's name telling the folks that he is somewhere and going to Chicago or some other place, has a position, etc. Say tired of living at home or anything you want. You know about the way he writes," unquote. Bert, by the way, was their nickname for Pearl. Alan Johnson, the porter from Wallingford's saloon, identified Pearl's clothing and testified about seeing the 3 leave together on that fateful night. George H. Jackson, the coachman, provided his harrowing account of the ride to Fort Thomas, including Walling's death threat and the sounds of Pearl's distress. Perhaps most damaging was the testimony about Jackson's preparation for murder. Multiple witnesses confirmed he'd been asking about poisons for weeks before Pearl's arrival. He'd purchased cocaine and had been seen with a fine dissecting knife. The prosecution argued this was never about an abortion. It was always about murder. The defense tried various strategies. They produced William Trusty, who claimed to have driven the cab and said Pearl was already dead when transported, killed by a botched abortion. But Trusty's story fell apart after scrutiny, and he fled town immediately after testifying. Jackson himself took the stand, maintaining his innocence with what observers called natural shrewdness. He claimed Pearl's belongings were in his possession because he was trying to find her a place to stay. He accused Walling of the actual murder. His testimony was smooth and confident, but the evidence was overwhelming. On May 14, 1896, after deliberating briefly, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. Walling's trial followed a similar pattern, though he maintained to the end that while he knew of Jackson's plans, he had not participated in the actual murder. He was also convicted and sentenced to death. The execution was set for March 20th, 1897. Both men spent their last night differently. Walling slept, while Jackson stayed awake, joking with guards. That morning, Jackson made a last-minute attempt to save his roommate, writing to the governor that Walling is not guilty of this crime, I am. But when pressed for details that would prove Walling's innocence, Jackson refused. When the mayor asked Walling one final time where Pearl's head was hidden, He insisted he didn't know and would not lie even to save his life. Both men were hanged simultaneously at 11:30 a.m. behind the Newport courthouse. Neither neck broke in the fall. Both slowly strangled to death over several minutes. According to witnesses, Walling's last words included a vow to haunt the area where Pearl's head was hidden and all those involved in his prosecution. Pearl's headless body was returned to Greencastle for burial on March 27, 1896. She was dressed in her white graduation gown and laid to rest in Forest Hill Cemetery on the highest point, where her parents could see her grave from their home. Hundreds attended, including her entire graduating class who served as pallbearers. But the story did not end with the execution. Within days, reporters noted that an evil eye seemed to have fallen on those connected to the case. Several police officials and attorneys involved met with bad luck and tragic ends. The legend of Pearl Bryan and her missing head began to grow, fueled by folk songs that emerged within a decade of her death. The building that would become Bobby Mackey's music world had its own dark history that predated Pearl's murder. Built in the 1850s as one of the largest slaughterhouses in the region, it processed countless animals over several decades. The key feature that would later fuel supernatural speculation was the well in the basement, a deep shaft designed to drain blood and refuse from the killing floor. According to period accounts, the blood from the slaughterhouse would flow so heavily that it turned the nearby Licking River red. The well had to be deep to handle the volume, boring down through the limestone bedrock. When the slaughterhouse closed in the early 1890s, this blood-soaked pit remained. Local legend, impossible to verify but persistent in its telling, claims that after the slaughterhouse's closure, occultists began using the abandoned building for rituals. The idea wasn't entirely far-fetched for the area. The late 1800s saw a surge of interest in spiritualism and the occult across America. The blood-saturated well would have held symbolic significance for such groups. The connection to Pearl Bryan's murder comes through Scott Jackson's alleged membership in this occult group. While the trial focused on the pregnancy as motive, local storytellers suggested a darker purpose, that Pearl was chosen as a sacrifice, her head reserved for ritual use before being disposed of in the well. By the 1920s, the former slaughterhouse had been converted into a distillery and speakeasy. Prohibition had turned northern Kentucky into a smuggling hub, with illegal alcohol flowing across the river from Cincinnati. The building's isolated location above the railroad tracks made it perfect for illicit operations. Violence was endemic to the bootlegging trade. Though specific incidents from this era are poorly documented, the building developed a reputation as a place where problems were solved permanently. Bodies allegedly disappeared into the river or were transported elsewhere to avoid attracting police attention to the operation. E.A. Buck Brady purchased the property in the 1940s as Prohibition ended. A successful bootlegger looking to go legitimate, Brady saw potential in the building's location and layout. He invested heavily in renovations, transforming it into the Primrose Club, an upscale gambling establishment that would soon attract the wrong kind of attention. Brady's Primrose Club was too successful for its own good. By 1946, it was cutting into the profits of mob-controlled casinos in Newport. The Cleveland Four crime syndicate, which controlled much of the region's illegal gambling, sent Red Masterson to convince Brady to sell or partner with them. The confrontation between Brady and Masterson became the stuff of local legend. When Masterson showed up to negotiate, Brady was ready with a shotgun. He shot Masterson in the leg, leading to his arrest for assault. At trial, Masterson refused to identify Brady as his attacker, not from kindness, but because the mob preferred to handle such matters privately. After beating the charges, Brady knew his time was running out. The mob had made it clear that refusing their offer was hazardous to his health. He sold the Primrose and fled to Florida, where he would commit suicide in 1965. Before leaving, however, local legend says Brady cursed the building, vowing that those who profited from it would meet bad ends. The mob reopened the building in 1947 as the Latin Quarter, a significant upgrade from the Primrose. The main floor featured fine dining, quality entertainment and beautiful hostesses. Gaming tables and slots occupied side rooms, while the basement was converted into dressing rooms for performers. A small stone cell was constructed to deal with problem gamblers who could not pay their debts. One Latin Quarter employee later testified about the cell's purpose. Those who owed money would be held there until they could arrange payment or convince someone else to cover their debt. Those who could not sometimes didn't leave the building, at least not alive. The basement's proximity to the old well made body disposal convenient, though most corpses were allegedly transported elsewhere. Throughout the 1950s, Newport police routinely raided the Latin Quarter. Officers would arrive with sledgehammers, breaking through walls to find hidden gaming equipment. The cat-and-mouse game continued for years, with the mob rebuilding after each raid. But increased federal attention to organized crime eventually made the operation untenable. The Latin Quarter closed in 1961. Among the ghosts said to haunt Bobby Mackey's, none was more prominent than Joanna. According to the legend, she was a dancer at the Latin Quarter whose father was connected to the mob. She fell in love with Robert Randall, one of the club's singers, a relationship her father violently opposed. The story goes that when Joanna's father discovered she was pregnant with Robert's child, he had the singer murdered. Different versions describe different methods: hanging in the dressing room, shooting in the parking lot, or simply disappearing one night, never to be seen again. Devastated and 5 months pregnant, Joanna poisoned herself in the basement dressing room. The historical evidence for Joanna is problematic. No death certificates, newspaper accounts, or other documentation support her existence. Attempts to connect her to various mob figures of the era have failed. Some researchers suggest she might be a composite of several women who worked at the club over the years, their stories blending into a single tragic narrative. Yet employees and visitors reported encountering Joanna regularly during the building's operation. She was associated with a specific rose perfume, a cloying, old-fashioned scent that appeared suddenly and overwhelmingly. Witnesses described seeing a beautiful woman in 1950s clothing in the basement mirrors, always with an expression of profound sadness. She seemed particularly drawn to pregnant women, who often reported feeling uncomfortable or threatened in her presence. After the Latin Quarter closed, the building saw several short-lived incarnations. It briefly operated as a bingo hall, attempting to capitalize on a legal loophole that allowed charitable gaming. When that failed, it became a Hard Rock cafe in the early 1970s, not affiliated with the famous chain, but trading on the name's recognition. The Hard Rock, known locally as the Bloody Bucket, catered to a rough biker crowd. Violence was common both inside and in the parking lot. Multiple shootings occurred during its operation, including at least 2 fatalities. The Wilder police chief at the time, Robert Schindler, told reporters they had, quote, an awful lot of trouble down there, unquote, mostly in the parking lot where disputes were settled after closing time. The final straw came in 1977 when a patron was killed with a shotgun just outside the entrance. The negative publicity and increased police attention made it impossible to continue operating. The Hard Rock closed its doors, leaving the building vacant once again. Robert Randall Bobby Mackey was born in 1948 in Concord, Kentucky, a tiny railroad town with a current population of just 19 people. Music was in his blood from an early age. At the age of 4, he won $5 at a talent show singing Hank Williams' Your Cheatin' Heart. His mother taught him guitar when he was 8, and he spent his youth harmonizing with songs on the jukebox in his father's grocery store. After high school, Bobby worked as a railroad brakeman while playing in bands around Cincinnati. When the railroad laid him off in 1970, he pursued music full-time. By 1978, he'd built a steady following playing at various Cincinnati clubs. With a wife and a new baby, he faced a choice: move to Nashville to pursue a recording career or establish his own venue for financial security. Bobby had noticed the abandoned building at 44 Licking Pike during his railroad days. He told Discovery Channel producers that he'd always felt strange when passing it on the bus. Something about the place drew his attention. When friends from Wilder suggested he look at the property, he finally went inside. The building was a mess. It had been closed for over a year, and remnants from its various incarnations littered the space. Tables and chairs from the Hard Rock remained set up as if waiting for customers who would never come. Old posters covered the walls. The basement was packed with decades of accumulated junk. But Bobby saw potential. Standing on the stage, he could envision crowds dancing to country music. Bobby and his wife Janet purchased the building in April 1978. Neither believed in ghosts or knew about the building's violent history. They were simply a young couple starting a business. That innocence wouldn't last long. Carl Lawson walked into Bobby Mackey's life before the club even opened. The 20-year-old had worked at the Hard Rock and lived with his parents nearby. He asked Bobby for work during the renovation, and Bobby, needing help, hired him for cleaning and painting. Despite his odd manner, big glasses, a dreamy air, and a tendency to talk to himself, Carl proved a dedicated worker. As Bobby tells it, the first sign something was wrong came during a casual conversation. Carl mentioned that weird things happened in the building. When pressed, he began describing experiences that made Bobby's blood run cold. Footsteps crossing the empty dance floor at night, invisible presences in the basement, the sensation of being constantly watched. Bobby's reaction was purely practical. He'd invested everything in this club, and he didn't want ghost stories scaring away customers before they even opened. He made Carl promise to keep quiet about the supernatural activity. Carl agreed, but asked to live in a small apartment above the bar. Despite the alleged haunting, or perhaps because of it, he wanted to be close to whatever inhabited the building. Carl moved in before the club's September 1978 opening, sleeping with a brace against his door and a shotgun beside his bed. He began what would become a 34-year relationship with the building's spirits, a relationship that would ultimately destroy him. Janet Mackey's experiences started almost immediately. She described an overwhelming feeling of malice that seemed to seep from the walls. While cleaning alone one day, she heard the same arguing voices that she'd noticed during their first visit, a man and woman in heated discussion. Following the sounds to the kitchen, she found it empty. Then came the sink incident. As Janet peered into it, trying to locate the source of strange sounds, the basin began filling with thick, red liquid that looked like blood. When she tried to back away, an invisible hand pressed against her back, pushing her toward the rising liquid. She felt the force trying to shove her head under. The pressure increased the more she struggled. Carl Lawson heard her screams and came running. The moment he entered the kitchen, the force released her, and the liquid vanished. Janet was left shaking and terrified. If Carl had not been there, she later said, she didn't know what would have happened. Bobby's response to his wife's terror was skeptical. He didn't believe in ghosts and suggested there must be a logical explanation. Old pipes, tricks of light, maybe stress from starting the new business. This dismissal would create a rift between them regarding the club that never fully healed. The violent climax of Janet's experiences came when she was 6 months pregnant. While cleaning the second-floor office, she felt the familiar sensation of not being alone. As she swept her way onto the landing at the top of the stairs, an invisible hand grabbed her arm. The touch was so unexpected, she cried out, and the grip momentarily loosened. Then came 2 deliberate pushes. The first made her stumble forward. The second, stronger push sent her tumbling down the entire flight of stairs. As she looked up from the bottom, she saw what appeared to be a man's shadow on the landing, which quickly vanished. The fall sent Janet into premature labor. Their daughter was born weighing only 1 pound, 15 ounces. Though the baby survived after weeks in the hospital, Janet never forgot that something in the building had tried to kill their child. She refused to enter Bobby Mackey's alone after that, and eventually stopped coming at all. As Bobby Mackey's music world established itself as a successful honky-tonk, Carl Lawson's relationship with the spirits intensified. He claimed to communicate regularly with multiple entities, learning their names and stories. Joanna was his most frequent companion. He would hold long, one-sided conversations with her, sometimes in front of bemused employees. Carl's most significant discovery came while cleaning the basement. He found loose floorboards that revealed the old slaughterhouse well. The circular opening was packed with dirt and debris, but clearly visible. To Carl, this wasn't just a historical artifact. It was an active portal to hell. After discovering the well, Carl's behavior became increasingly erratic. Bobby recalled that he'd have to talk to him for a little while to figure out how to deal with him because he always seemed to be different. Some days Carl was his normal, if odd, self. Other days he seemed possessed by different personalities. Employees began reporting their own experiences, many centered around Carl. Roger Heath, a bartender, once saw small handprints appear on Carl's back, as if invisible arms were embracing him. The prints were child-sized and remained visible for several minutes before fading. Carl claimed the spirits were growing more aggressive. He showed fellow employees scratches and bruises that appeared overnight. During one incident, witnessed by multiple people, Carl was thrown against a wall by an unseen force. He began sleeping less, drinking more, and muttering constantly to invisible companions. By 1989, Carl's stories had attracted the attention of Doug Hensley, a local horror writer who frequented the bar. When Bobby mentioned some of Carl's experiences, Hensley immediately saw book potential. Though Bobby initially resisted, eventually he relented, telling Carl to share everything with Hensley. The stories Carl told were increasingly elaborate. He claimed to have found Joanna's diary hidden under floorboards, detailing her doomed romance and suicide. He described encounters with Pearl Bryan's headless ghost near the well. He spoke of demonic entities that emerged at night to torment him. One called itself Sam Tucker, another simply Charlie. Hensley's first book about Bobby Mackey's came out around 1989 as a small printing titled The Terror at Bobby Mackey's Music World. Bobby didn't expect it to go anywhere, but the timing could not have been better, or worse, depending on perspective. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw the height of the satanic panic in America. Media outlets seriously reported on supposed networks of devil worshippers. Law enforcement received training on identifying satanic crimes. In this environment, a book about a demon-haunted nightclub with connections to possible occult murders was guaranteed attention. The media came calling. In 1991, Bobby, Janet, and Carl appeared on The Jerry Springer Show to discuss the haunting. The next year, it was Geraldo. Each appearance brought more attention, more visitors, and more reported supernatural experiences. Hensley incorporated these new accounts into expanded editions of his book. The final version, Hell's Gate, Terror at Bobby Mackey's Music World, published in 2005, had grown into a comprehensive chronicle of every reported ghost sighting, complete with notarized statements from witnesses. The accounts ranged from relatively mild to terrifying. Multiple people reported the jukebox playing the anniversary song while unplugged, a song the machine didn't even contain. Others described being touched, pushed, or scratched by invisible hands. Several people claimed their cars mysteriously failed in the parking lot, only to start normally once towed away from the building. One of the most dramatic incidents involved a patron named J.R. Costigan. While washing his hands in the men's bathroom, he looked in the mirror and saw a dark-haired man with a rope around his neck. The apparition attacked him, punching and kicking, until Costigan lost consciousness. When he came to, he immediately reported the incident to Bobby. Costigan was so shaken he sued Bobby Mackey for maintaining dangerous supernatural conditions without proper warning. The case went to court, where Bobby's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss written entirely in verse, saying, "The plaintiff claims in his petition he was assaulted by an apparition, injured by a ghostly nemesis on Bobby Mackey's premises. Alas, this essence disembodied followed the plaintiff to Demen's Potty, where the dark-haired haunt with neck and noose soundly kicked complaints drunk caboose." Though the case was dismissed, the judge suggested Costigan take the matter up with a higher power. Bobby took the precaution of posting a warning sign that remained until the building's demolition. Psychiatric researchers studying possession cases have documented something deeply disturbing. When multiple people claim to be inhabited by the same entities over decades, they describe identical personalities with specific names and voice patterns that couldn't have been shared through normal communication. In 1993, when a Pentecostal minister attempted to exorcise a Kentucky nightclub caretaker, witnesses recorded distinct voices emerging from the man's throat, one snarling and calling itself Sam Tucker, another raspy presence named Charlie, entities that visitors to the location had been reporting independently since 1978. By 1993, Carl Lawson's mental state had deteriorated significantly. Friends and family members convinced him to undergo an exorcism, believing he was genuinely possessed by the building's evil spirits. The first attempt was performed by Reverend Glenn Cole, a Pentecostal minister who later described Bobby Mackey's as the most evil sight I've ever stepped foot on. The exorcism was filmed, with reporters present, just in case anything happens. During the ritual, witnesses reported Carl's palms pressed hard against a table, his head nodding rhythmically as he mumbled in a low, different voice. His eyes remained fixed on the Reverend with an expression observers found deeply unsettling. As Reverend Cole commanded the spirits to leave, Carl's body began jerking and spasming. Different voices seemed to speak through him, the snarling Sam Tucker, the raspy Charlie, and others. After hours of prayer and struggle, Carl collapsed. When he came to, he claimed to feel different, cleansed. The relief was temporary. Within weeks, Carl reported the spirits had returned with 7 more, making his situation worse than before. A second exorcism attempt involved weeks of prayer sessions. During one, Carl discovered his underwear soaked with blood from spontaneous hemorrhoids that Hensley described as tremendous in size, growing and spreading like poison ivy. The exorcisms failed to provide lasting relief. Carl lived above the bar until 2012, his mental health steadily declining. He developed severe alcoholism, which friends attributed to his attempts to cope with constant supernatural harassment. He died in 2012, having spent over 30 years documenting and living with what he believed were the ghosts and demons of Bobby Mackey's. The 2008 premiere episode of Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures brought Bobby Mackey's to a new generation of paranormal enthusiasts. Host Zach Baggins and his crew employed an aggressive investigation style, provoking spirits and daring them to manifest. During filming, Baggins received 3 long scratches down his back, captured on camera. The episode's success spawned 2 sequels and cemented Bobby Mackey's reputation as the most haunted nightclub in America. Until the building's demolition, the club's resident paranormal investigators were Gatekeeper Paranormal, a team of 4 women who took a more scientific approach. Laura Rowland, Angela Johnson, Mandy Loftus, and Kim Short began leading tours in 2014, focusing on historical accuracy and respectful investigation methods. The team documented extensive EVP, that's electronic voice phenomena, activity. One recording captured a female voice with a southern accent, whispering, "She does not like all these people in here." They filmed shadow figures, glowing orbs and mists, particularly around the sealed well. Unlike more sensational investigators, they noted that aggressive provocation only increased violent activity. Their investigations revealed patterns in the haunting. Activity intensified around the well area, where many experienced dizziness and nausea. The dressing rooms maintained constant activity, with rose perfume manifesting suddenly. Pregnant women reported particular discomfort, sometimes followed by miscarriages. Electronic equipment regularly malfunctioned, especially near the well. Physical attacks increased when spirits were provoked or disrespected. The basement remained the epicenter of activity until the end. During tours, visitors reported being pushed, scratched, or having hair pulled by invisible hands, seeing full-bodied apparitions, particularly a headless woman, hearing phantom music from the Latin Quarter era, experiencing overwhelming emotions, sudden sadness or rage, and feeling invisible hands trying to push them toward the well. The Wall of Faces became a popular stop on ghost tours. Water damage on a concrete wall had created patterns that resolved into faces when viewed from certain angles. While skeptics attributed this to pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns in random data, believers claimed the faces represented trapped spirits. The supernatural activity at Bobby Mackey's extracted a real toll on those who spent significant time there. Carl Lawson paid the ultimate price, dying broken and alcoholic after 3 decades of claimed demonic torment. His picture still hung above the bar until the demolition, and some employees reported sensing his presence, though whether as protector or another trapped soul remained debated. Janet Mackey never recovered from her experiences. Though she occasionally visited after Bobby hired security to accompany her, she never felt comfortable in the building. She passed away in 2009 after a long illness, having spent most of her marriage avoiding the business that defined her husband's career. Multiple employees quit after frightening encounters. Several investigators reported physical injuries, scratches, bruises, and in one case a broken ankle from being pushed downstairs. The psychological impact may have been worse. Former employees described nightmares, anxiety, and the sensation of being followed home by malevolent presences. Even skeptics acknowledged the building's oppressive atmosphere. On certain nights, employees refused to go to the basement alone. The mood could shift suddenly from festive to threatening, sending shivers through staff who'd worked there for years. Throughout it all, Bobby Mackey maintained his skepticism. In interviews, his demeanor changed noticeably when discussing the paranormal. The twinkle left his eyes. His manner became abrupt. He never personally experienced anything supernatural in his club, though he admitted the building had gotten hold of him in its own way. His perspective was pragmatic. Ghost stories brought customers, and customers bought drinks and paid cover charges. He charged paranormal investigators hefty fees for overnight access. Ghost tours ran 5 nights a week when the club was not featuring live music. If people wanted to believe in ghosts, Bobby would happily take their money while he played Hank Williams covers on stage. Yet there were hints Bobby knew more than he admitted. He recorded the song Joanna in 2010, a haunting ballad about the ghostly dancer, with verses saying, "Now some may not believe it, and I won't say it's true, but some of us have smelled your rose perfume." When asked why he wrote it, he simply said the story inspired him musically. Until its final days, Bobby ran his club Friday and Saturday nights as it was meant to be, a honky-tonk, where people drank beer and danced to country music. His band, billed as the best damn band in the land, played classic country with Bobby's rich voice carrying songs of heartbreak and redemption. For those nights, Bobby Mackey's music world was just a bar with great music and a mechanical bull. The other 5 nights belonged to the ghosts. Despite extensive investigation, core mysteries remained unsolved when the building came down. Pearl Bryan's head was never found. The well remained sealed, its depths unexplored. Bobby resisted suggestions to use ground-penetrating radar or fiber-optic cameras, saying that he did not want to disturb whatever might be down there. The true identity of Joanna remains unknown. Historical researchers have found no documentation supporting her existence, yet hundreds of people claimed to have encountered her. The rose perfume appeared without explanation, sometimes so strongly it drove people from the basement. The source of the violent antagonism toward pregnant women defied explanation. Janet Mackey, Pearl Bryan, and the legendary Joanna were all pregnant when they met their fates at or near the building. Modern visitors reported miscarriages after basement tours with disturbing frequency. Most puzzling was why this particular location attracted such darkness. From its slaughterhouse origins through bootlegging, mob violence, and modern hauntings, the building seemed to draw tragedy like a magnet. Some suggested the limestone geology created conditions conducive to paranormal activity. Others believed the blood-soaked ground itself was cursed. Carl Lawson believed he knew the answer, that the well was literally a portal to hell, allowing demonic entities free passage into our world. His death ended the most direct communication with whatever inhabited Bobby Mackey's, leaving only questions and the occasional terrified tourist. The demolition of Bobby Mackey's on December 6, 2024, marked the end of an era for northern Kentucky. As the yellow Caterpillar front loader smashed through the brittle wood, television crews captured the final moments of what many considered the most haunted nightclub in America. Bobby and his wife Denise watched from a distance as their 45-and-a-half-year legacy crumbled to rubble. "It's bittersweet for sure," Bobby told reporters that day, watching the building that had defined his life collapse. The mechanical bull had been auctioned off, the famous warning sign removed, and the basement with its infamous well buried under tons of debris. When asked about the spirits that allegedly haunted the building, Bobby's response was characteristically pragmatic. "I guess they'll go wherever they want to." But Laura Rowland from Gatekeeper Paranormal, who led the ghost tours for 10 years, speculated, "Many people think that the spirits are attached to the land, and that whatever's built on this property, the spirits will still be here." She believes the demolition leaves not only debris, but some ghostly questions, remarking, "There's a very good chance that the new club will be haunted as well." They're preserving the portal to hell and the wall of faces, she says, so anything haunting those pieces of the building will likely remain. The club has temporarily relocated to Florence earlier in 2024, but the new location lacks the dark history and oppressive atmosphere of the original. Without the blood-soaked basement, the sealed well, and over a century of accumulated tragedy, it's just another honky-tonk. Exactly what Bobby always claimed he wanted. Yet questions remain. What happened to the entities that Carl Lawson spent decades documenting? Did the demolition release them? Or are they still bound to the land itself? The property at 44 Licking Pike sits empty now, the rubble cleared away. But locals report strange occurrences continue. Unexplained cold spots, the faint scent of roses, and occasional sightings of a headless woman walking where the building once stood. Pearl Bryan's missing head was never found, despite the building's complete demolition. The well, if excavated during cleanup, revealed no secrets, or at least none that were publicly disclosed. The mysteries that Bobby Mackey's took to its grave may never be solved. Perhaps some secrets are better left buried. But given the violent supernatural activity that plagued Bobby Mackey's music world for decades, it seems whatever dark forces were attracted to that cursed ground have not departed with the building's destruction. The music has stopped, the dance floor is gone, and Bobby Mackey's songs of love and loss now echo only in a different venue. But on the empty lot, where the club once stood, older rhythms may still pulse. The ancient beat of blood and darkness that has claimed this ground since the first drop of animal blood touched Kentucky soil over 170 years ago. The headless woman of Bobby Mackey's may walk still, searching eternally for what was taken from her on that cold February night in 1896. And somewhere in the darkness, the spirits that tormented Carl Lawson for 3 decades may be waiting for the next structure to rise on this blood-soaked earth, ready to resume their reign of terror. The building is gone, but the haunting of 44 Licking Pike may be far from over.
Welcome back to the studio. And one of America's great haunted legends is gone. As I said in the beginning, many investigators have gone in over the years. Some have got elaborate, massive amounts of contact and communication, while others have gone in and picked up very little. A few EVPs, maybe a couple shadows, but that's the extent. Our own Danny Holroyd from Southern Michigan Paranormals has gone in there and got close to no contact. What is the truth behind the history, the mystery, and the legend of Bobby Mackey's music world? And what about the history leading up to its creation? You know, it was once said that when history and legend become so muddled together that you can't tell one from the other, print the legend. Is a lot of these stories legend, myth? Do they truly not really exist? I'm afraid, my friends, that will never be known. But that's it for episode 10 of Paranormal Papa Podcast, the legend of Bobby Mackey's with the great Darren Marlar. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I look forward to the next episode. But until then, Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. God bless you. God love you. We do. And happy hunting.